On the maps, it was just a thin gouge in the limestone, a drainage cut no wider than a country road back home, packed with banyan roots, jagged coral, and shadows deep enough to hide a whole battalion. The engineers called it an approach route, the infantry called it a death funnel, but the officers who briefed us only called it the corridor. The Japanese had been in that stretch for months. They'd carved the walls into honeycombs of hidden firing ports. Machine gun slits were cut so clean they looked like natural cracks in the rock, and somewhere deeper inside, dug so far back the scouts couldn't even map them, were the 40 defensive positions everyone kept whispering about. 40. Fortified. Layered like the ribs of an iron beast. That was where they wanted us to go, 5 Sherman tanks, a single platoon's worth, to punch a hole for the infantry. No artillery preparation, no naval gunfire, no engineers clearing the way first, just us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I don't think any of us actually believed we would make it back. Our tank Able 3 was third in the line. I was the gunner, tucked in my steel cage of levers, optics, and sweat-soaked padding. The crew was the same crew I'd lived with since Hawaii. Harris, our driver, quiet as a church mouse. Roscoe, assistant driver, bow gunner loud as a busted exhaust pipe. Corley, the loader, a Pennsylvania farm kid with the arms of a lumberjack. Captain Miles, the tank commander, one of those men who looked older than his age, simply because he never stopped thinking. At dawn, before the operation kicked off, Miles gathered us around the tank's left tread. "You've all read the brief," he said, lighting a cigarette with a hand that didn't shake. "But listen to me. If we hesitate inside that corridor, we'll get bottlenecked and cut apart. No stopping unless we're dead." Corley laughed under his breath. Exactly. And that was that. The infantry formed up behind us, 2 companies of Marines who would follow through the gap once we made it. No one wanted to look them in the eye. Nobody wants to see the faces of men who depend entirely on 5 tanks to stay alive. Tanks break, jam, stall, burn. I've seen them crack open like eggshells. But to those infantrymen behind us, we were giants. Armor, protection. A path through the devil's front door. I remember thinking, God help them if we fail. The sun was barely over the ridge when we started rolling. The first 2 tanks, Able 1 and Able 2, were the assault pair. We were the middle anchor. Able 4 and Able 5 stretched behind us. The treads crushed coral underfoot, a sound like bones snapping, dust plumed, off the earth in pale clouds. Miles tapped my shoulder inside the turret. "Eyes up. First firing port is supposed to be 30 yards past the bend." I peered through the scope. Nothing. No movement. Just jungle. The corridor's entrance narrowed so sharply that Able 1 had to angle its hull just to squeeze through. When the second tank made its turn, Miles muttered into the intercom. "You boys feel that?" The ground changed, less dirt, more stone. The rumble under the hull vibrated the steel walls like we were driving onto a buried stovetop. Harris answered. "Feels like coral cut, man-made," Roscoe cursed. "Means they prepared this. Means it's killing ground." He was right. The Japanese didn't wait long. It began with a shriek, that horrible, metallic banshee sound of Type 147mm anti-tank rounds fired from close range. The shell slammed into Able 1's glacis plate, sparks spraying like a welding torch. The tank didn't stop. Another hit the right side. A third. The slits in the cliff walls flashed white with muzzle bursts. Miles didn't hesitate. "Gunner left port." I swung. The firing slit appeared in my optics, just a black mouth in the rock. Corley rammed a hay round into the breach. "Up!" I squeezed the trigger. The tank bucked. The shell hit the rock wall and shattered the entire firing port into a shower of stone. The machine gunner behind it, or whatever was left of him, disappeared in the collapse. But the next position opened up, and the next, and the next. The Japanese had stacked those ports like stairs if we wiped out one. 3 more had angles on us. Tracer fire pinged off our side armor. The sound inside the tank was deafening, not loud, but deep, like a hammer smashing the world outside into the hull. Able too returned fire with its 75mm, knocking out another slit, but then we saw something that tightened every gut. A suicide bomber running straight toward Able 1 with 2 mines strapped to a board. Miles screamed into the mic, "Harris, go!" Our tank lurched forward, treads grinding, metal groaning. But Able 1 got to him first. The bomber vanished under its tracks, the explosion muffled beneath the tonnage of steel. Roscoe swore, long and low. "This whole damn corridor's rigged with them." He was right again. 30 yards deeper, the terrain changed. The Japanese had rolled huge limestone boulders onto the path, not enough to stop us, but enough to slow us. Exactly what they wanted. Able 1 smashed through the first. Able 2 climbed onto the second but slipped, losing momentum. In that moment of hesitation, a hidden anti-tank gun fired from the right wall. The shot tore into Able 2's suspension. The tank pitched sideways, tread flapping loose. Smoke leaked from the cracked hull. Harris slowed, not stopped. Slowed, but even that was dangerous. Miles roared, "Don't stop! Don't you ever stop!" 2, as its crew popped the hatches and scrambled out under fire. 1 Marine grabbed his comrade by the collar and hauled him behind our hull as we bulldozed forward. The Japanese fired on them until we blocked the line of sight. It hit me hard, right then. We weren't just tanks making a push. We were moving shields, the only walls those men had. The first true defensive position wasn't a slit. It was a bunker-heavy logs fronted with sandbags, wedged into the spine of the left cliff. The engineers said it was too thick for infantry grenades. They hadn't said anything about a Sherman. Miles thumped the turret wall. "Drive a ram-ite." Harris didn't question. He never did. Able 3 surged forward, engine roaring to full power. The bow slammed into the bunker with an impact that rattled my spine. Logs snapped. Sandbags exploded into grey dust. The whole structure wrenched inward. "Gunner, inside." Corley hadn't even finished loading the round before I fired. The interior of the bunker vanished in a column of fire. Even inside a tank, the blast felt violent, a deep concussion that sucked the air from our lungs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Miles exhaled, a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. 1 down. 1 out of 40, 20 more yards in. The corridor constricted again, narrow enough that if a tank stalled, the entire column would freeze. That was when the Japanese shifted to their next tactic: high-angle grenade drops. From holes carved above us, they tossed Type 97 grenades straight onto the decks of the tanks. Some bounced off harmlessly. 1 landed on Able 4 and detonated near the commander's cupola. Shrapnel sliced through his shoulder. He slumped halfway out of the hatch, hanging like laundry. Miles didn't break. "Keep moving. Let the infantry pull him off." The Marines behind us surged forward under fire to retrieve the wounded commander. Their courage never failed to astound me. We were steel and heat. They were flesh and blood. Yet they followed us into that nightmare without hesitation. The next position was worse than the first, a twin-chambered strongpoint reinforced with coral stone. A direct hit might collapse it, but Miles didn't trust angles inside the narrow corridor. "Driver, center the hull. We're ploughing straight through." We hit full throttle. The tank smashed into the structure. The stone front cracked, but didn't fully collapse. Harris revved harder, treads clawing the rock. The Sherman groaned, coughed smoke, and pushed again harder until the whole bunker folded inward in a cloud of white dust. Inside the turret, the air turned thick. Dust seeped in through every seam. Our breaths tasted like chalk. But the tank kept going. 2 down, Miles said quietly. The Japanese shifted tactics again. From cracks in the walls and tunnels dug beneath the corridor floor, they poured out dozens of them, maybe more, swarming the tanks on foot. They rushed with satchel charges, pole mines, grenades tucked into their jackets. They tried jumping on the engine grills. They tried jamming explosives between the treads. Roscoe's bowgun hammered non-stop, brass casings piling around his feet. Harris weaved the tank left and right to shake off climbers. Corley shouted over the intercom, "They're trying to breach the hatches." Miles swung the .50 on the cupola and fired downward in sweeping arcs. The muzzle blast shook the entire tank. We were 300 yards into the corridor, only 2 bunkers smashed, and already the Japanese were throwing everything they had at us. If we turned back now, the infantry behind us would be slaughtered. If we stayed, we might be crushed under numbers. Miles' voice broke through the chaos. "We keep going. There's no stopping." The third major defensive point was a pillbox carved directly into the rock wall, with only a narrow entrance shielded by boulders, a perfect anti-tank trap. The moment Able 1 rounded the bend, the pillbox unleashed a torrent of fire that raked its turret. Then a shaped charge hit its left side, a bright flash, a crack, and the tank erupted in flames. The crew bailed out, screaming, their uniforms burning. Marines swarmed them with canteens and dirt, smothering flames, while the rest returned fire at the pillbox. Miles didn't let us stop. "Ram it! Now!" Harris pushed the throttle so hard the engine whined like a wounded animal. Our tank smashed into the pillbox entrance, sealing it shut with our own hull weight. The defenders trapped inside panicked. We could hear them banging from the other side of the rock. Corley loaded a round without waiting for the order. I fired. The blast reverberated through the stone like thunder. The banging stopped. 3, Miles whispered. Only 37 more to go. We didn't know it yet, but the death of Able 1 was the turning point. No commander ever says it out loud, but every tank crew carries one silent fear. Don't let us be the first to burn. When another tank goes up in flames before yours does, you feel 2 things, both shameful and unavoidable. Relief. The crew of Able 1 were dragged to the rear, 3 still screaming from the burns that turned their uniforms into black, smoking flakes. The Japanese defenders cheered from the tunnels a deep, guttural chant that echoed through the corridor and bounced off the rock walls like living armor. They believed they had broken our momentum. They believed 5 Shermans were too few. They believed the corridor was theirs. And for a second, just 1 second, the column hesitated. Miles' voice came through the intercom like the crack of a whip. "We do not. Stop here. Driver forward." Harris didn't argue. He jammed the clutch, and the whole tank lunged into the smoke ahead. Behind us, the Marines saw our tank advance again, even after seeing another Sherman burn. Their morale swelled like a wave. Dozens of them surged behind our hull, rifles raised, following us into the deepest section of the corridor like men possessed. Miles kept shouting commands, not because we needed them, but because he knew silence was death in a place like this. "Stay tight. Loader, he next. Gunner, watch for high-angle ports. Bow, keep the deck clear." We became a machine, not a crew of 5, but a single organism made of steel, sweat, smoke, and fire. 5 Sherman tanks had begun this push. Now we were down to 4, and we were about to hit the densest fortifications yet. 30 yards beyond the burning wreck of Able 1, the corridor widened just enough for 2 tanks to advance side by side, the only place in the entire valley where this was possible. And that was exactly where the Japanese concentrated some of their heaviest fortifications. It was a 2-tiered defensive wall, a coral and timber barricade hiding firing ports at both eye level and above shoulder height, arranged in a perfect kill zone. The entire wall was angled slightly toward the entrance, forcing any tank entering the widening to expose its side armor momentarily. The Japanese had engineered the geography into a funnel that punished hesitation. Even inside the tank, I could feel it, the psychological shift. The corridor's tight walls suddenly gave way to a basin-like space. Open ground meant one thing. We were exposed. And the enemy knew it. The first volley hit us before we even aligned our turret. Machine gun tracers sliced across our bow like red-hot sewing needles. Grenades clattered across the deck, some bouncing off, some exploding close enough to ring the hull like a gong. Then came the anti-tank fire. The first hit slashed across our right side. The second smashed against our mantlet. The third clanged against the glacis plate with a booming metallic crack that rattled my teeth. Miles cursed into the intercom. "Driver, keep angle straight. Gunner, crack that lower port." The wall in front of us was alive, dozens of firing slits, shadows moving behind them, flashes sparking in rapid succession. The Japanese weren't shooting blindly. They were targeting our weak points, track joints, optics, the commander's cupola ring. They had trained for this moment for months, maybe years, but we weren't infantry. We weren't soft targets. We were a 75mm gun with tracks, and that mattered. Corley shoved another round into the breech, his voice cracking. "He up." I swung the turret. The lower firing port snapped into view, a black slit jutting from a wall of white stone. "On! Fire!" The shot detonated against the wall with a roar that clouded the entire area with dust and smoke. Chunks of coral flew into the air. Several firing ports vanished in the collapse. The wall didn't fall, but it staggered. Miles pounded my shoulder. "Again! Higher! Break it wide open!" Corley loaded so quickly I thought he'd crack his wrists. "Up!" I fired. The top half of the wall cracked open like a rotten tooth, but we were still taking fire from at least 10 more firing ports. Then Able 4 pulled up beside us, side by side, in the only space wide enough for it, and unleashed a 75mm round into the heart of the upper tier. The entire barricade erupted. Timbers snapped, stones flew, bodies tumbled. The Japanese defenders disappeared in the collapse, swallowed by their own fortification. Miles didn't wait for the dust to settle. "Full thrust, ram it! Clear the breach!" We smashed into what remained of the double-layer wall, treads grinding over shattered logs and sandbags. The debris buckled beneath us, then gave way, completely. When we broke through, so did the infantry. The Marines behind us poured in like water through a broken dam. The Japanese thought the double wall would halt us. Instead, it became the place where we gained momentum. Beyond the wall, the corridor tightened again, funneling the tanks back into single file. This was where the next defensive point waited, not above ground, but below it. The underpass bunker was a tunnel cut directly beneath the corridor floor, with 3 firing ports angled upward. Japanese machine gunners fired at our belly plates, one of the Sherman's least protected surfaces. It was the sort of design meant to kill a tank without ever showing the shooter's face. We felt the hits immediately. Metal clanged beneath us like rocks thrown at a ship's hull. The belly armor shook, and sparks flashed between the treads. Harris shouted, "They're hitting the floor plates!" Miles reacted instantly. "Bow, strip the port, gunner aim down." But aiming down inside a Sherman turret isn't easy. Our depression angle was limited. The ports were too low. Then Roscoe, loud, obnoxious, fearless. Roscoe leaned out of his bowgun position and screamed over the intercom, "I got it!" He opened up with the M1919, stitching the ground in front of the tank with bullets. Coral chunks flew, dust billowed. His tracers found the port, and he didn't let up. His fire streamed into the hole like a blowtorch. Then a grenade erupted inside the port. One of the Marines had crawled close enough to toss one in. The explosion tore through the underpass. The firing stopped. Miles exhaled. "Port neutralized. Move." We rolled on, 4 positions down, 36 to go. The next 100 yards were a nightmare of noise, smoke, and unseen attackers. The Japanese defenders used vertical shafts carved into the corridor walls, narrow tunnels that let soldiers climb up or down unseen. They popped out to attack the tanks, point blank, then vanished before Marines could catch them. One climbed onto our rear deck, screaming as he tried to jam a mine between the engine grills. Roscoe swiveled his deck gun, firing so close the brass casings bounced off the Japanese soldier's body. The attacker toppled off the deck in pieces. Another lunged for our left tread and shoved a satchel charge under the bogies. "Harris left slew!" Miles shouted. Harris jerked the tank left hard, grinding the satchel charge into the earth before it could detonate. The explosion blew a crater under our left track but spared the tank. Then the right side erupted in fire. Marines caught another attacker climbing our hull and shot him off the tank. Miles whispered into the intercom, "Keep breathing. Keep breathing. Keep moving." I realized then that he wasn't telling us. He was telling himself. By the time we reached the 5th major defensive position, my uniform was soaked with sweat. My throat tasted like powder residue. My eyes stung from dust. I had fired so many rounds that my shoulder ached from the recoil. The fifth position was the worst so far. A fortress carved directly into the cliff face, with interlocking firing ports and a massive center embrasure wide enough for a heavy machine gun. 3 layers deep, reinforced with coral, timber, and stone. A masterpiece of Japanese engineering. It dominated a section of the corridor where the tanks could not maneuver the walls pressed tight again, making us easy targets. The fortress opened fire the moment we rounded the bend. The blast hit us head-on, a white-hot flash from the central embrasure. The round dented our bow with enough force to rattle the turret ring. A second hit followed, then a third. Miles barked, "Gunner, take out that embrasure. Loader AP." Corley slammed an armor-piercing round into the breech. "Up." I fired. The AP round struck the stone edge of the embrasure, carving a deep groove but not breaching it. Again, another AP round. Another impact. The embrasure held. Able 5 moved forward behind us and fired. Their AP hit dead center, a lucky, perfect shot. The stone mouth shattered, collapsing inward. The machine gun fire stopped instantly, but the flanking ports kept firing dozens of rifles and light machine guns, shredding the air around us. Miles made a decision. "Driver, ram it." Harris hesitated for the first time all day. "That's solid stone, sir." "Ram it." Harris swallowed. "Yes, sir." The tank lunged. The impact was like colliding with a train. The turret bucked. The crew jolted so hard Corley slammed into the turret wall. The fortress didn't collapse, not fully, but it cracked. Deeply. Enough for the infantry to exploit. Marines swarmed around us, throwing grenades into openings, firing into cracks, forcing their way behind the structure where a small access tunnel led inside. The fight raged for several minutes. Close quarters, violent, primal. Then the firing stopped. A Marine corporal appeared in front of our hull, drenched in sweat and dust, and gave Miles a thumbs up. Position 5 was gone, but the corridor around us was still dark with smoke, and the ground still trembled with distant detonations. We were only halfway through the valley, and 3 tanks remained operational. The Japanese had not broken, they had merely shifted, and the worst was still ahead. I wasn't sure when the fear left my body, maybe it never did, but by the time we crawled our way back to the orchard clearing, the 5 Shermans had formed up like something out of a fever dream. Their engines idled hot, rumbling like chained bulls beating their hooves into the ground. Black exhaust curled up into the early morning haze, mixing with the lingering smoke from the Japanese mortar barrage. Lieutenant Pierce stood on the lead Sherman, headset crooked around his neck, map fluttering in the wind. His face looked older, like he'd aged about 10 years in an hour, but his voice still had that same cutting edge. "Mount up what you can. Anyone left on foot stays behind the tanks and moves when we do. Once this starts, it doesn't stop. We punch through, or we die right here." There it was. No sugarcoating. No glorious speech. Just simple math. We were going to hit the Japanese head-on, through a narrow corridor they'd spent weeks turning into a death funnel, trenches, machine gun pits, log bunkers, spider holes, concealed mortar pits, the whole works. And we were going at it with 5 tanks, 26 infantrymen, and about half as much ammunition as we needed. Pierce tore the headset back on, slapped the turret, and spoke into the radio. "Steel 1 to steel, platoon. Engines forward." The tanks roared louder, metal clattering like teeth in a giant's jaw. And then came the line I'll never forget. "Let's kick the door in." The Shermans lurched forward, and hell began. The ground trembled as the tanks advanced, their treads crushing fallen branches, burning debris, and the occasional spent shell. We followed in the tanks' wake, rifles raised, trying to stay low behind the armored giants. The Japanese didn't make us wait long. The first shot cracked through the air like a whip. A Type 97 anti-tank rifle from a concealed pit snapped a glowing tracer straight into the lead Sherman's glacis. It sparked off harmlessly, but the noise made everyone flinch. Then the whole ridge lit up. From the left, a pair of Nambu machine guns spitting red tracers across the field. From the right, an 81mm mortar thumped somewhere deep in the tree line, sending a shell shrieking down toward us. Ahead, A heavy log bunker camouflaged like a pile of brush opened fire with a Type 92 heavy machine gun. The Sherman formation instantly responded. The lead tank rotated its turret, the 75mm gun whining as it locked on. Fire! The cannon blast thumped through my ribs. The bunker vanished in a plume of dirt and shattered logs. The second Sherman hosed the left flank with its cokes. 30 cal, sweeping the tree line with roaring bursts. Infantry behind us shouted orders, returning fire, dropping low when bullets sparked off the tank armor like angry sparks. But the Japanese had planned this kill zone well. The ground narrowed into a kind of natural bottleneck, forcing the tanks to ride in one-by-one formation, perfect for ambushes. And the Japanese used every inch. A satchel charge team darted from a trench on the right, 3 men with explosives wrapped in canvas bags. Pierce saw them first. "Right flank! Satchel team!" he shouted into the radio. The third Sherman pivoted its hull MG, stitching the ground with fire. The satchel men dropped, bodies tumbling in the mud, but one kept crawling, dragging the charge, and he got close enough. "Back! Back!" someone screamed. The Sherman's right tread erupted into a burst of ARP. Dirt! Boom! Shaking the whole platoon. The tank rocked hard, nearly losing its track, but somehow stayed upright. The crew inside cursed and roared over the radio, but the tank kept moving. Slowly, grinding, determined. We cheered like madmen, and we kept going. After the initial ambush, the ground leveled into a flat stretch of blackened, churned dirt. It looked safe, but we had learned safe ground was a lie. The area was honeycombed with spider holes. The first soldier who stepped too far off the tank's path found out the hard way. A bayonet thrust straight up from a hole, stabbing him through the thigh. He screamed, fell, and the Japanese soldier emerged like a demon crawling out of the earth. 3 more popped up behind him, then 5 more. They came up everywhere, shrieking, some throwing grenades, some rushing with fixed bayonets. We formed a ragged firing line behind the Shermans, rifles cracking in patterns, dropping them one by one. But for every spider hole cleared, 2 more seemed to open. The tanks could only suppress so much. Their machine guns roared, stitching lines of fire across the ground, but the popping, writhing maze of holes was impossible to cover fully. A Japanese soldier broke through, charging straight at Pierce's Sherman turret with a magnetic mine. I raised my Garand, breathed half a second, and fired. The man dropped mine, clattering harmlessly on the dirt. Pierce glanced down at me from the turret. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just lifted his chin the slightest bit, a silent approval that felt like a medal pinned on my soul. The Shermans pushed forward again, grinding over spider holes, collapsing some, ignoring others. We followed, firing into any glint of movement we saw. But then we reached the ridge, and everything went quiet. Too quiet. If the earlier ground was a nightmare, the ridge ahead was the Devil's Palace. You couldn't see the Japanese, but you could feel them. The whole hillside was one enormous defensive labyrinth. Bunkers layered behind bunkers, mortar pits dug behind false walls, machine gun nests hidden behind foliage so thick it looked like untouched forest. 40 separate positions, intelligence later said. Probably more. Pierce looked at the ridge, then into his radio. "All tanks," he said quietly. "We break it here." The Shermans lined up into a rough V formation, the lead tank at the center, 2 slightly behind on each side. "Load he!" The breech of the tank guns clanged. "Advance!" The ridge detonated with enemy fire. A dozen machine guns opened at once like a single, monstrous drumbeat. Mortars thumped from somewhere behind the crest. Grenades arced through the air like angry birds. A 47mm anti-tank gun fired from a hidden pit. Crack! Slamming a shot into the front Sherman. It punched a shallow dent but didn't penetrate. The Shermans answered with fury. 5 tanks blasting he shells into the ridge at point-blank range was indescribable. You felt every shot in your bones. You tasted metal in your mouth from the shockwave. The ground jumped under your boots. The ridge turned into flying dirt, shattered timber, spraying shrapnel. Machine gun nests vanished. Mortar pits collapsed. Wooden bunkers splintered into matchsticks. But the Japanese didn't break. They kept firing, kept coming. They were everywhere, running between trenches, popping up from holes, dragging knee mortars to new positions. Then we hit the real backbone of their line, a reinforced bunker with 2 heavy machine guns, interlocking fields of fire. We couldn't get close. The Shermans couldn't get an angle. Anyone who moved even a foot forward was chewed down instantly. Pierce slammed a fist onto his turret. "We need to flank it," he yelled. But flanking meant exiting the tank's cover suicide. Unless you used a tank like a battering ram. Pierce switched to intercom. "We're breaking that damn bunker open," the driver protested. The gunner protested. The loader protested. Pierce didn't care. He leaned out the turret, pointed at the bunker, and screamed, "Drive!" The Sherman lurched forward, rattling like it was going to shake apart. It ploughed through brush, over trenches, through 2 machine gun pits, crushing them flat. The bunker ahead spat fire. Tracers whipped past Pierce's helmet. Bullets pinged off the turret like hail, but the tank kept coming closer, closer, and then it slammed into the bunker with a sound like God punching a mountain. The reinforced logs buckled, the roof cracked, the whole wall caved inward. Pierce waved us up. We stormed what remained of the bunker, firing into it, tossing grenades, clearing the inside in seconds. The ridge began to collapse. Not physically, but psychologically. When their strongest bunker fell, the Japanese line started unraveling. Gunfire thinned. Mortars slowed. Marines pushed, forward behind the tanks, one position after another falling under coordinated fire. 5 Shermans had cracked what 2 entire infantry companies had failed to take. We kept pushing until the ridge was behind us, the trees opening into a clearing of churned earth. And then, for the first time all day, silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. We gathered at the far end of the ridge, near a small creek trickling through a break in the jungle. The water was muddy, tinged with smoke, but to us it looked like gold. Pierce climbed down from his tank, legs shaky, smoke and sweat streaking his face. The man looked exhausted, utterly drained but alive. He pulled off his helmet, let the wind hit his hair, and finally said, "We did it." No background music, no cheering crowds, just that simple sentence. But we felt it deep. 5 Shermans against 40 Japanese positions, and we'd made it through. We lost 10 men in the push, another 17 wounded. 2 tanks were damaged, so badly they were barely drivable. But the ridge was ours. Pierce slumped on the ground next to me, breathing hard. "You know," he said quietly, "that wasn't strategy." I waited. That was desperation, wearing a helmet. I didn't disagree. But sometimes that's what wins wars. We thought the fight was done. We were wrong. Japanese doctrine never allowed losing ground without a counterattack, especially one as fortified as this ridge. They would come back, probably at night, and we were in the open, exposed, low ammo, tanks overheated, men exhausted. Marines laid out perimeter defences around the creek, setting up the captured bunker remnants as improvised barricades. Pierce walked the perimeter, tapping shoulders, giving quiet orders. "Watch the tree line. Set your bar there. Tank 1, rotate turret to cover that approach. Hold fire unless you see bodies." Night fell. The jungle came alive with insects and distant crackles like twigs, snapping. Too many twigs. Too close. At around midnight, we heard it. A whistle. High, sharp, echoing. Then came the sound of 1,000 feet moving at once through brush. Not careful, not stealthy, rushing, charging. The Japanese were coming back to reclaim the ridge, in force. "All tanks, wake up." The Sherman's engines ignited one by one in the darkness, like monsters rising from sleep, and we gripped our rifles tighter, because the real fight was just beginning. The impossible tank push, where 5 Shermans rammed through 40 Japanese positions, memoir-style continuation, final part. At first, the night felt like it was holding its breath. Then came the first scream, a long, rolling battle cry, raw, shrill, unmistakably Japanese. It tore through the darkness like a rip in fabric. Then another howl, and another, until it felt like the entire jungle was screaming. Every Marine near the creek stiffened. Some muttered curses. Some whispered prayers. A few just clenched their rifles so hard their knuckles turned white. I swallowed dry air and tried to steady my hands, because this wasn't just an enemy counterattack. This was a banzai charge, a full force, all-in, last-ditch effort to overwhelm us in the dark. Pierce climbed onto the lead Sherman's turret, no helmet, just his headset, silhouette outlined by the faint moonlight. "All tanks," he said, into the radio. "Warm barrels. Wait for muzzle flashes. Do not repeat. Do not fire blind." We waited. The jungle went black again. Silent again. Then a single rifle shot cracked from the left flank one of our perimeter Marines firing at movement. A second later, 100 Japanese rifles answered in overlapping bursts, tracers sliced out of the trees in angry red stripes. "Contact!" Someone on the left shouted. The ridge erupted. They came pouring out of the trees in a solid mass, bayonets glinting, officers waving swords, grenades, clutched in fists. The kind of wave you only see when the enemy knows they have one chance left. They hit us like a storm. Our riflemen opened up, BARs spitting fire. The first row of attackers went down hard, but the second row stepped over them, shrieking, charging with a kind of suicidal determination that made your blood turn cold. The Shermans lit up. All 5 tanks opened fire at once, Coke's MGs ripping long bursts, Hull, 30 seconds mowing down paths, 75mm guns firing, HE shells blindly into the densest parts of the tree line. The flashes of cannon fire strobed through the dark like lightning. The blast waves hammered air from our lungs. Dirt rained down on us. Shell casings clattered like rain on metal. Still the Japanese came. The left flank began to buckle. I saw 2 Marines get hit, one in the shoulder, one in the jaw, dropping instantly. Their squad leader pulled them back behind a fallen log, shouting for a corpsman. A Japanese soldier broke through, charging toward Pierce's tank with a grenade in each hand. He made it within 10 feet before a burst from the Hull MG turned him into a collapsing silhouette. Another team crawled low, dragging a knee mortar. "Mortar! Center line!" I shouted. The second Sherman spotted them just in time. Its machine gun shredded the area, but one Japanese soldier fired a round before dying, the little projectile arcing high, landing behind our line. It exploded 2 feet from Corporal Henley, blowing him backward in a spray of dirt. He screamed once before collapsing. We dragged him back, yelling for Doc Mason. The ridge had turned into chaos, shadows rushing, rifles flashing, the ground shaking with tank fire. I'd been in firefights before, but never one like this. Never one where the enemy seemed to be running on something beyond adrenaline, pure resolve, pure desperation. And they weren't done. Not even close. Around 20 minutes into the assault, the firing on the right flank suddenly dropped off. Suddenly. That's when we realized why. The Japanese had stopped shooting because they were already inside our perimeter. A group of about 15 soldiers had crawled through one of the old spider hole trenches that cut deep into the ground. They popped out near our ammunition stash. Someone shouted, "In the rear! In the rear!" We whipped around, firing instinctively. Their officer, a wiry man in a tattered uniform, drew a sword and charged straight into our supply line. He cut down a Marine before I even registered what was happening. The second Sherman rotated its turret, trying to bring the Cokes around, but friendly fire risk froze the gunner. So we had to do it ourselves. We rushed the ammo pit, me, Sergeant Vince, Ramirez, and 2 machine gunners. The officer turned toward us, sword raised, screaming something I couldn't understand. I fired twice. He stumbled. Vince fired once. He dropped. But the soldiers behind him kept coming. One threw a grenade. It bounced between Vince's boots. He froze. Ramirez dove, scooping it with both hands and flinging it behind a log. We all hit the deck. Boom! The air punched out of my lungs. Ramirez didn't move for 3 seconds. Then he rolled over, coughing. "You're insane!" I choked out. "Yeah," he rasped, "but alive." We pushed forward again, firing into the last of the infiltrators until the area fell quiet. But now our ammo line was wrecked, boxes smashed, cartridges rolling everywhere, grenades scattered. And our main line? Still under full assault. We hustled back, half crawling, half sprinting, because the perimeter was starting to break. Pierce was still perched on his tank like a captain lashed to the mast of a sinking ship. He saw us running and pointed urgently at the tree line. "Look!" I followed his finger. The second wave, dozens more Japanese soldiers rushing through the brush, silhouettes moving fast, determined, relentless. The first wave had been brutal. The second wave was a wall. Pierce shouted into the radio, "Load canister!" Every tank crew froze. Even I froze. "Sir, did you say canister?" the gunner of Tank 2 asked, bewildered. Pierce roared, "Load canister!" Canister shells were not common. They turned a tank's cannon into a giant shotgun, hundreds of steel balls blasting outward in a brutal, devastating spread meant for clearing mass infantry. They were controversial. They were gruesome. But right now, they were the only thing between us and annihilation. The loaders slammed the specialized shells into the breaches. The tanks rotated toward the charging wave. Pierce took a breath. Fire! The ridge lit up like day. Kawoom! The canister round ripped across the lower slope, instantly shredding the entire front row of attackers. Bodies collapsed in a wide arc. The blast carved a gap straight through the wave. Tank 2 fired next. Tank 3, Tank 4, Tank 5. Each shot tore massive holes in the advancing force. Men tumbled. Screams cut the air. The wave shattered like it hit a wall of thunder. But the most terrifying thing? The survivors kept coming anyway, even stepping over the fallen, charging with bayonets held high, even after being blasted by canister, even after losing half their number. This was no ordinary counterattack. This was a final stand. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.